Hello and welcome to Toy Polloi 2, and today I thought I'd take you behind the scenes of what goes on over on Toy Polloi, because what you see in the final videos is not necessarily what happens. Sometimes while I'm filming I make mistakes, and sometimes things just don't go quite how I had planned. And I've just been filming this repair of a vintage Transformers Generation 1 hot rod, and there was one thing that is very straightforward to do on this project that I just couldn't get right. I'd already had a go off camera and it worked first time, but when I came to film it, every time I did it, it went wrong, and all of that footage is obviously edited out of the final thing. So the final video that you'll see over on Toy Polloi looks like I did it first time, but in actual fact it took me quite a few goes. So let's take a look at some of those goes and you'll see what I mean and see how frustrating these things can be. Fixing the loose feet should be a fairly simple process as well. I was hoping that these feet would actually just sort of come out, but they are clipped into the sort of leg piece there, and I think fixing the feet should be a fairly Fixing the loose toes should be a fairly simple process. I was hoping that we'd be able to unclip them, but the plastic looks a little bit brittle and I don't want to sort of push it too much to unclip them. So we're going to fix them another way, which is incredibly simple. All you need is some darning elastic, which is this black thin elastic, and a piece of beading wire to thread it through. So first thing we're going to do is take the beading wire and thread it through the gap between the toe and the leg. It's a fairly small gap. It's a fairly small gap, which is why I'm using the beading wire. You can't just thread the elastic through, so I'm just going to push that through. You can see that goes through pretty easily. Then we're going to take a small length of this darning elastic. I'm just going to cut a small piece of that off. I've already bent a little hook on the end of the I've already bent a little hook there on the end of the beading wire, so I'm just going to hook that onto the darning elastic. And I'm going to pull that through between the toe and the leg so that we've got one piece of darning elastic sort of in between the two. If I can just do that, so pull that through like that. Didn't work, let's try that again. Fixing this loose toe should be a fairly simple process. I was hoping I could unclip the toe, but it's sort of clipped in place in such a way that it looks like you'll break the plastic if you try and unclip it. So we're going to use just a piece of darning elastic and some beading wire to fix this instead. So I have some beading wire here. This is just stuff you can buy from most haberdashery shops, and I've got a small section of it here which I've put a little hook in one end. We are going to thread that through between the toe and the leg, so I'm just going to push that through like so. It shouldn't be straightforward to do. It should be pretty straightforward to do. So there we go, that's threaded through. And that little hook on the end there, into that I'm going to put a tiny piece of this, and into that hook I'm going to thread a tiny piece of this darning elastic. This is the stuff here. You can get this again from most haberdashery shops. It's very thin and very cheap elastic. So I'll just hook that onto the little hook that we've made there. And then I should be able to pull this through between the toes and the main part of the leg. So if I just hook that on again. So all I've got to do is pull this through the gap. It's a little bit tight, just now we're on to fixing these loose toes, and it should be a fairly straightforward process. I was hoping I could unclip this toe, but the plastic looks a bit brittle, so we're going to do it a slightly different way to how I'd originally planned. We need a piece of darning elastic which we're going to thread through, and then we can tie that onto where the sort of toes pivot, tie a knot of it, and that will give it enough sort of friction there to stop the toe moving. But we've got to thread this elastic through, and that's a little bit awkward just because there's such a tiny gap. You can just about see the gap between the toes and the main part of the leg, and for that we're going to use a small piece of beading wire. So I've got a piece of beading wire here with a little hook on one end. I'm going to thread this through and then pull the darning elastic through with it, and then once that's through we can sort of tie everything off. So let's thread this through, and then we can So let's just get this threaded through first. So we push that into there. It's, as I say, a bit of a tight squeeze. It's not the easiest of things to do. It's a very thin gap that we're going to get this through, but it can be done. So we just push that in there. I think if I push it like that, in fact, if I rotate the toe forwards and push it in, that should pull the wire through, which it has. So there we go, that's the wire through like that. We can then get a small piece of this darning elastic. We can then get a small piece of this darning elastic. I'm just going to hook that onto the end of the beading wire, like so. and then we can pull the rest of that through, and that should thread the beading, and then we can pull the rest of that through, and that should thread the wire. And then we can pull that beading wire through, and that should pull the and then we can pull that beading wire through, and that should take the darning elastic with it and thread it through, which it has. So there we go. I can unhook the beading wire. We no longer need that, and we've now got a piece of this. We've now got a piece of this. And we've now got a piece of this darning elastic through, and all we've got to do is pull it over to one side of the foot, so where it pivots on either the left or right, doesn't matter. We're going to tie a knot, so get both ends of the elastic and tie a knot and pull it taut into the joint like so. We'll do one more knot because we want this to stay in place and never come out. So tie it like that. Sometimes it breaks, doesn't matter. We can cut the end of that off, cut it as close as possible, like so, and now that foot should be pretty stiff. There's a little bit of the darning elastic there sticking out. Just get a knife and you can push that in and hide it away. That's why it's good to use the black darning elastic, because you won't see this because the toe's on hot shot. That's why it's good to use the black darning elastic, because you won't see it with the toes here of Rodimus. That's why it's good to use the black darning elastic, because you just won't notice it against the toe there. So push that in. As I say, that toe is really nice and firm. It rotates easily, but it's not going to sort of fall. Now that toe is really nice and firm. It rotates really well. But you'll see sometimes you get little bits of the darning elastic just sticking out there. So I'm just going to get a knife here, and I'm going to carefully push those in between the joint and the toe, and that's why it's really good to use the black darning elastic, because it's easily hidden. But now that's in place, the toe really rotates quite didn't work. Now we come to fixing the loose toe, and I was hoping I'd be able to unclip this, but the plastic looks a little bit brittle, so I'm going to do this a slightly different way. I've got some darning elastic here, which is just a thin black elastic. You can see I've got a whole roll of it, and my idea is to thread that through between the toe and the main part of the leg, and we'll loop that around and tie it in a knot, and that should just add a little bit of friction to the joint there. But it's quite awkward to get it through because the gap is incredibly tiny. In fact, you can only just about see that there's a gap there. So I have some beading wire here, which is again thin wire, and I put a little loop at one end. I'm going to thread the other end of this through between the gap, and then I'm going to put the beading wire through the hook, and hopefully we'll be able to pull that through, and then we can tie everything off. So let's poke this through and see what happens. Right, that's gone through pretty easily. Just grab that. Maybe I need to grab it with a pair of pliers just to pull it through. Yeah, that's not too bad at all. So you can see we've got this little loop at the end. I'm going to get some of this darning elastic and hook it through that little loop, and then I will pull the rest of that wire through, and then that should hopefully pull the darning elastic through, and we can start tying this off. So we grab that again. Just make sure that's all lined up, which it is. Let's give that a pull and see what happens. So now we're going to deal with this loose toe, and to do that I'm going to be using some beading wire and a bit of darning elastic to thread that. So now we're going to deal with this loose toe. I was hoping that I could unclip it, but it doesn't appear to be easy to do that, and I'm worried about breaking the plastic of the leg. So we're going to do it a slightly different way. I've got a piece of beading wire here which I can thread through the gap. It's a very tiny gap there, and then if I thread that through, I should be able to pull a piece of this darning elastic through, and we can tie that off onto where the toe sort of pivots, and that should give it an extra bit of friction. So the first thing to do is take a piece of this beading wire. You can see I've just put a little hook in one end like that, We'll thread this through. Should be possible. It's a fairly tiny gap, but I reckon we can thread that through. So yep, that is threaded through. And then I'm going to get a piece of this darning elastic, which is pretty awkward to pick up. I'll hook that onto the end where I've made a little loop on the beading wire, just like so. Like that. And then we can pull that through, and that should pull the darning elastic through with it. And then we should, and then that should pull the darning elastic through with it. Just hope that does. Oh God, this is a f***ing nightmare. It hasn't. Right, that's it for today. Give up. So, as you can see, I did actually manage to get him all fixed up in the end, but it took me quite a few goes, and it started to get a little bit frustrating because every time I tried it, it just didn't work. In fact, what ended up happening was that I stopped filming that day, went and did something else, and I came back to it the next day, and then the first time I did it, it actually worked. So sometimes I just need a break from filming. But this is the stuff that you don't normally see in the videos. What I show you in the final video is me just getting things right, which is why a lot of people think that everything I do just works first time. And I have to say it doesn't. Sometimes things do go wrong. So hopefully this little peek behind the scenes of what actually happens when I'm filming is of interest to you. If it has, then make sure to hit the subscribe button here. And if you've really enjoyed it, then head on over opposite to my main channel, Toy Polloi, and subscribe there, and that's where you will see me actually finish repairing this figure. So check that video out as well, and thanks for watching.